past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Greetings and welcome back. There's a great piece in the LA Progressive entitled Putin-Trump Meeting, Endgame or PR Event. And it opens, if we're to believe the US media, the meeting was about Trump and Putin negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine. But did the meeting signify the start of serious negotiations and the beginning of the end of the war in Ukraine? Not necessarily. There are other possible interpretations for the meeting in Alaska. What else could it be? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Before we get to the topic of the day, let's quickly look at a couple of headlines. Sputnik International reports Trump holds firm on peace deal with Putin despite European pushback. European leaders and Volodymyr Zelensky didn't succeed in changing Trump's peace proposal, which the U.S. president had reached with Putin. Former defense politicians and chief of staff with the Sweden Democrats, Mikael Valtersson, told Sputnik. Valtersson also notes that playing for time may be part of Zelensky's strategy, hoping that eventually a shift in the geopolitical landscape might restore the hardline anti-Russian alliance. This strategy, though, is likely a lost cause, according to the former Swedish defense expert. By dragging out the negotiations, Zelensky and his allies risk further territorial losses to Russia and an increase in war casualties. Iran warns Israel could resume its war at any time. Iranian First Vice President Mohammad Reza Aref warned that Tehran must be prepared for confrontation at any time. Iran's First Vice President warned that Israel could resume its war on Iran and that Tehran must be prepared for the possibility. Quote, "We must be prepared at every moment for confrontation. Right now, we are not even in a ceasefire agreement. We are in a cessation of hostilities." The Iranian official said that Tehran prefers diplomacy, but is unsure what the other side will do, and that if the war does start, Iran will be prepared to end it. And finally, Democratic Republic of Congo and M23 rebels missed deadline to reach peace agreement. The government of the Democratic Republic of Congo and M23 movement have failed to reach a peace deal in Doha as of yesterday, missing the deadline they had set in earlier meetings. This raises fears that the two parties might reverse the progress made to end the hostilities. And one of the quick important issues there to me is, since the United States is trying to play both sides the middle in this conflict, how is this really going to shake out? Well, on today's episode, the issue before us is, according to my guest, a meeting with Putin may provide the cover for Trump to finally start an actual U.S. withdrawal from the conflict. After all, during the past 9 months, the U.S. has continued to send weapons, money, and provide extensive military assistance to Ukraine, while calling for Ukraine and Russia to stop fighting, the U.S. has continued to participate directly and deeply in the conflict. Well, what's going on here? Let's talk to my guest. He's a former professor of economics and business at St. Mary's College in California. He's the author of the recently published book, The Scourge of Neoliberalism, U.S. Economic Policy from Reagan to Trump. And he's the author of the article in the LA Progressive, Putin-Trump Meeting, Endgame, or PR Event. Dr. Jack Rasmus, as always, Jack, welcome back. Can we hear you, Jack? Go ahead.
My pleasure. Can you hear me?
There we go. All right. So the Washington Post reports today, Trump offers so-called assurance U.S. won't send ground troops to Ukraine. He suggested European nations would have troops on the ground in Ukraine while the United States would support them in other ways. And this while some Republicans in Congress are taking a harder line against Putin, even as Trump appears to have, as they now want to say, acquiesced to some of the Kremlin's demands. Jack, what is going on here?
Well, you got to understand that the fundamental issue in this conflict has always been Ukraine joining NATO and having NATO just a few hundred miles from Moscow on its borders. That's been the issue from the beginning. That whole development began in the 90s when Bill Clinton, by the way, was the one who originated pushing NATO East. And under Clinton, we had the first East European countries join NATO. And then soon after 2000, the rest of them joined NATO. In 2005, the U.S. tried to bring Ukraine into the Western orbit there. They had an election orange revolution in 2005. It didn't work. There was like a neutrality of Ukraine. Then they tried in 2010. And then in 2014, they pulled off a coup because they figured they couldn't do it by legal maneuvers, electoral maneuvers anymore. So they pulled off a coup. And the U.S. position, NATO position, has always been to pull Ukraine into NATO. And that means if Russia ever attacked a NATO country by Article 5 of the NATO agreement, all the other NATO countries, including the U.S., would have to come to their defense, and you would have had the next World War for sure. So NATO has always been the key issue. Now, you got to understand that Europe has always and still is saying Ukraine has to be in NATO. That's Europeans' position. Of course, that's Zelensky's position, because Zelensky protects himself by being aligned with Europe and NATO. This war would be over if the Europeans did not support Zelensky 100%. They are ensuring that the war continues. Zelensky wants to continue the war because that's how he stays in power, you see. And the Europeans, why do they want the war to continue? Because Europe's economy, this is my analysis, Europe's economy has been in the crapper for at least 15 years. They can't get that economy going anymore. Europe is falling behind the US and China. The future means it's going to be worse economically in Europe. Europe needs to militarize and develop a military-industrial complex to prop up its economy, just like the U.S. has. Europe has relied on the U.S. to provide it a military umbrella. Trump does not want to continue spending the money on Europe. He doesn't see that as totally strategic anymore. What's strategic is the Pacific and the Western Hemisphere and the Arctic. So he's looking for a way to cut military costs by pulling out of NATO financially, at least, and cutting other costs like USAID and NED and all these other expenditures, because the U.S. is behind in strategic new weaponry like hypersonic missiles, drones, and all that. So the U.S. has to switch its spending. So that kind of explains where Trump is coming from. But the Europeans want to continue the war. Trump doesn't want to continue spending on the war. If the Europeans want to buy U.S. weapons, then Trump's okay with that. And by the way, Zelensky just asked for $100 billion of U.S. weapons to be paid for by the Europeans. How they're going to pay for it's another question, unless they're going to steal Russia's assets in their banks, which I think probably will happen. But you got to understand this. NATO, as I said, is the number one issue. All along up to this meeting last week, Europe's position and Ukraine's position has been ceasefire first. Mm-hmm. Stop fighting Russia, even though you're winning, right? Freeze in place and give us time, in other words, to recruit more troops and get more weapons and put them in the, our gaps in the front lines and so forth. In other words, it's a ruse in order to help ceasefire first and then negotiate is a ruse for Ukraine to reconstruct itself militarily.
Reconstitute itself.
Yeah, right. And the Russians know that. The Russians know that this is a ruse, right? And
they've been through this ruse twice, called Minsk 1 and 2.
And I'm telling you, where these negotiations, where the U.S. neocons, who are behind the Europeans in Ukraine, by the way, it's a tripartite of defensive here against Trump and Putin, right? The Europeans and all of them, they want to continue the war. But up until now, the number one strategic emphasis of NATO, West, Europeans, etc., has been ceasefire first, right? Mm-hmm. Now, in these negotiations, watch out. It may be Minsk 3 or 4, I'm saying, right? I think I smell another Minsk deal, at least concocted by the Europeans, right? Mm-hmm. Why? Because it's the number one demand is no longer ceasefire first. It is security agreement. That's the number one issue that came out of the Monday meeting. All these European leaders, they all flocked into Washington, D.C., and they all sitting at the table, and they're all throwing kudos at each other, oh, you're great, this and that. I mean, all of them came over. Starmer came over, Merz of Germany, Macron, Georgia, Van der Leyden, all of them came over. It was a full court press, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what's come out of that, I think, is a focus on security. Now, you got to understand what the Europeans and Ukrainians mean by a security agreement is NATO by another name.
Oh,
that's what that means. Article 5, in other words, NATO, Article 5, NATO means mutual defense, security agreement.
Right.
If you agree, okay, you won't be in NATO, Ukraine.
But Article 5 will still apply.
Or a language very much like that. That's what they mean by security agreement. You see, that's the whole idea here. And Trump has even said today, well, he said, we'll sell you before. He said, we'll sell you all the weapons you want. Right. I mean, U.S. won't provide them free anymore to Ukraine, but you can buy all the weapons you want. And as I said, Zelensky says, I want 100 billion, right? He's already said that. Mm-hmm. But, you got to understand what's going on here is a maneuver, in my opinion. You can call it Minsk 3. What was Minsk 2? Minsk 2 was in 2015 when they had the coup in 2014. They had the coup. And as soon as they had the coup, the Ukraine military started shelling the eastern provinces, the Donbass, and killing their own people, right? Mm-hmm. And that brought Russia in. And Russia was winning.
Correct.
Winning at that time. And it looked like the Ukraine military, which wasn't trained and supplied as it is now, right, was about to collapse. So the Europeans met with Putin and they in Minsk, a city in Belarus, right? And they agreed, let's stop the fighting, freeze in place, ceasefire, and we'll negotiate a compromise. Mm-hmm. Well, they had to cease fire. They never negotiated and agreed to anything. And what they agreed to, they admitted here in 2022, it was just a buying of time to rebuild the Ukraine military. Who said that? Angela Merkel. And
Francois Hollande.
Yeah, they admitted that Minsk 2 was just to buy time. They're trying to buy time again.
Right.
And they're going to meet in Minsk, I think, again. So is this going to be a Minsk 3 where instead of saying, okay, we agree, no NATO in Ukraine, but Russia, you got to agree to this security agreement backed up by the U.S. The Europeans want the U.S. to back it up, right? And what did Trump say? He said, oh, the Europeans can enter, part of what they want, can enter Ukraine, and the U.S. won't put troops on the ground, but they'll back them up. They'll back them up, right? To me, that's a backdoor to NATO. That's all that is. And that's been the number one issue all along. Now, the Russians' position has been multiple positions here, so long as June 2024, I think their positions were set out. What were their positions? You got to recognize the 4 oblasts, the provinces in Crimea, right? You got to be neutral, right? No NATO, but also neutrality. And to prove the neutrality, you got to reduce your military force. And there were some other demands about rights of Russian-speaking citizens in Ukraine, etc. Right? Well, Russia has backed off of that. Russia's, in my opinion, without saying so, their key demands right now, no NATO, that's always been number one, and recognize those 4 provinces. Now, I think what is behind the meeting last Friday is, I think that Trump...
Wait a minute, because before you get there, I think one of the reasons why Russia has backed off of some of those other demands is because they're winning. And I think the part of the Russian thing is, so long as you engage me in conflict and so long as I continue to take territory, that's on you, and I'm going to keep the territory I take. So that enables them to back off some of their less important demands and stick with, I'm keeping what I take because you're forcing me to fight. Except
that the Trump European vision of a security agreement means Russia ceases fire. In other words, they get a ceasefire.
But that's not going to happen.
Well, that's what they're going to propose. Okay. That's where they're going. Whether Russia agrees to that or not, right?
Okay.
And what the West, Trump, and Europe want is a ceasefire in place.
Right.
And in exchange for a security agreement, they will back off of one province, Donetsk. They will not leave Zaporozhia or Kherson, right? The Russians have taken all of Luhansk, the fourth one, right? And they have taken positions in Kharkov province and Sunni province, right? So what they're going to propose, or I think the proposal is, security agreement, because Russia's talking about they want a security agreement too, right? That's why Trump calls it a peace deal, not a ceasefire, right? You get a security agreement which leads to a ceasefire, but part of that ceasefire is we will give you Donetsk, but not the other provinces that you haven't fully occupied yet. Now, the biggest fighting, the toughest fighting is in Donetsk province. That's the toughest nut. That's where most of the forces are in conflict right now. The other fronts are kind of in stasis of some kind here. But the point, to summarize, right? What Trump and Europe are in agreement, in my opinion, is, we want a peace deal, right? We want security agreement first, but ceasefire and partial land transfer. Minimum land, but they get the ceasefire, which is what they've always wanted, you see. And they get NATO through the back door, a security agreement. And part of that is Europe will seize Russia's assets in their banks, buy American weapons and give them to Ukraine. And Ukraine will rebuild its forces here. And within 2 years, there'll be another war. Okay.
Let me go back to a point you made very early in the conversation, because I don't hear enough of this as part of the discussion. You said Europe's economy is in the crapper. And you said it has been for about the last 15 years. One of the reasons why the European economy is in the crapper is because the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which provided inexpensive natural gas to Germany that Germany then distributed throughout Europe.
And there's more.
And that was the precipitant event to the downturn in the European economy. And that was the intent of, during the Biden administration, blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. So why would Europe, after watching its major ally decimate the European economy, still turn to and trust the United States when the United States started this mess, Jack?
Because they're desperate to keep the U.S. in NATO. That's what it's all about, right? Mm-hmm. They don't have a defense industry. They got a few airplanes, but I mean, look at the UK. Look at Britain. What do they got? They got 50,000 men in arms. They can't get enough sailors to man their ships. The ships are stuck in port, right? I mean, it's a joke. Militarily, Europe is a joke because they've been sucking on the USA tit here for 70 years, right? And they let it atrophy so they could spend money on their social programs. You see, once they militarize here, and they're talking about $1 trillion, you know, Europe's going to start looking like the USA in terms of social programs.
Neocolonialism.
Yeah, and it's already started, by the way. They're all trying to prepare the role. But you got to understand that they, you know, it's to keep U.S. and NATO. They are groveling to the U.S. And it's not only, Wilmer, it's not only the pipeline and making Europe energy dependent on the U.S., which it is, right? But the U.S. has been doing other things to make Europe a dependency. For example, recent tax policies under Biden, the tax policies will give big tax cuts to any business, not just Europe business, if they relocate back to the U.S. That's what, you know, the infrastructure plan, the CHIP plan, and the so-called misnamed IRA, Inflation Reduction Plan, which is the subsidy for energy companies, is all about sucking European and world capital back into the U.S. And that's already been happening. So if you're taking real capital investment, the European companies are moving to the U.S. because of U.S. tax policies, right? U.S. is undermining Europe, making it more dependent. And then we have this recent tariff deal, right? Where, I mean, the Europeans are really taking it in the ear again, agreeing to anything that the U.S. wants and promising to invest $600 billion of European money capital in the U.S. instead of in Europe. Right? I can go down the line. There's a whole set of policies. Europe is becoming an economic satrapy of the USA. Satrapy was these, you know, old Persian provinces, right? Total dependency. Europe is becoming an economic dependency of the US. And Europe is failing. It cannot compete with the US. I mean, the banking system is decades behind the US banking system. They have no position in AI, artificial intelligence technology at all to speak of, right? A whole number of areas Europe is continuing to fall behind. They know it, and they're trying to attach their wagon politically and economically to the U.S. This is the last gasp of Europe here because it cannot compete with the U.S. and or China or the global South anymore. So it's becoming a dependency of the U.S. So they know that. They know they got to have NATO in. They know that they've got to attach themselves to the U.S. more deeply economically. And these leaders, you know, Starmer, Merz, Macron, all of whom, by the way, are in public opinion polls only polling 20% popularity, right? Approval. You know, their whole careers depend on continuing this war. So that explains why Europe wants this war to continue. And this forthcoming agreement, in my opinion, is just another way to continue the war. Because
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Because Russia, I don't think is going to agree to this. But, you know, that kind of, it's a maneuver. It's a maneuver. And I don't know if Trump is really in on the maneuver or really thinks that, you know, he may be dumb enough to think that, oh, this is a compromise and it will hold, etc. But if, you know, the problem is Russia has always talked about a security agreement, but not in the terms that Europe's talking about security agreement, right? Russia has always talked about no NATO, Whether they're going to fall for this backdoor NATO security deal, I don't know. Well, time will only tell. But to make a military comment, yes, the Russians are gaining ground, but slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I've been writing about Ukraine and the war militarily and otherwise, politically, economically, since August of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And the special military operation, right, was initially only 90,000 troops.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It was just designed to intimidate Ukraine to come to the bargaining table, which they did in Istanbul, and they had an agreement, and the U.S. scuttled that agreement because they wanted to continue the war. Europe and U.S. want the war to continue, and they will continue this war in one way or another for as long as they can. I mean, if they stayed 20 years fighting the peasants in Afghanistan, you think they're going to pull out of Ukraine? No, I don't think so. They need to buy time because they're losing. They need to buy time and shore up the Ukraine military once again. Okay. Now, Russia, I think, would settle for a security agreement in which there would be no NATO and no de facto NATO and those 4 provinces. I think that's what they would settle for. But the Europeans won't settle for that. They won't settle for that. Whether the Russians will be fooled again with a Minsk 3 or 4 remains to be seen. I doubt it. They've seen this before. But let me just say, I think also that the SMO, which is a professional army, right? Mm-hmm. All these countries have professional armies today, which have minimal troop sizes. The U.S. is a professional army, right? And China is a professional army. Russia has a professional army, but they only have like 1.5 million troops, and half of those are in Ukraine. I don't think the SMO, as structured right now, is sufficient in order to go all the way to Kiev. I don't think so. I think the Russians have to throw in more troops there. But if they throw in more troops, then they are exposed. They are exposed to NATO in Belarus and in the Baltics and so forth. And I will put it past NATO to open another front. The Europeans want another war.
Hence Armenia, hence the whole Armenia-Azerbaijan issue.
Exactly. That's just keep stirring the pot on the borders, right? Keep the pressure on stirring the pot on the borders.
You mentioned ceasefire first, and I scratch my head, and when I listen to Marco Rubio, and I'm gonna get into a couple of his quotes in a minute, I keep asking myself, how stupid do y'all think this man is? Because you screwed him on Minsk 1. You screwed him on Minsk 2. As we've just discussed, Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande come out and say, oh, we were lying from the get-go. We never intended for there to be a ceasefire. So what happens? On the 14th of July, Trump says, oh, there'll be severe tariffs on Russia unless a peace deal is reached. And then he goes from 50 days on July 14th to 10 to 12 days on July 28th. And what happens? Russia fires a barrage of more than 300 drones, 4 cruise missiles, and 3 ballistic missiles into Kiev. Then Russia launches on the 18th of a few days ago. Yeah, a couple days ago, Russia launches another attack of missiles and drones into Ukraine. So one of the differences I see now is where in previous conversations, Russia would stand back. Now, as they keep talking about ceasefire, Russia starts sending more missiles. And Russia keeps saying, no ceasefire, peace deal. If you want to stop me from sending missiles into your backyard, peace deal. And so that's one of the major signs or signals that I'm seeing that says that Russia is not falling for the banana in the tailpipe trick again.
Yeah, well, two comments. First of all, these on August 8th, these draconian sanctions were supposed to occur, right? Or else, is sort of a warning to Russia. And first, it was, as you said, 50 days. Then it was 12 days. He moved it up to August 8th. August 8th came and nothing happened. Why? Well, you got to understand the nature of these sanctions that were being proposed are called secondary sanctions. Mm-hmm. In other words, not sanctions on Russia, which aren't working, right, but sanctions on anyone who bought Russian oil.
India.
And what happened in India? It blew up in Trump's face. Trump thought that he could buy India off with some F-35s and so forth, and split India off of the BRICS and so forth. It blew up in his face. India gave him the finger and said goodbye. Mm-hmm. That was the signal. Secondary sanctions aren't going to work because if India, China, and Russia and whatever, Brazil are all together ignoring them, well, the rest of the global south is going to go along with the BRICS, or most of it, and secondary sanctions are very dangerous for the U.S. because they cause the U.S. dollar to collapse, or might. Mm-hmm. And the dollar's already deflated by 11%, right? It's already weakening. Mm-hmm. So they decided, we can't do this, right? We can't do this. So he sends Witkoff to Russia and says, well, let's meet. That's how he gets out of imposing the sanctions, right? But now you got to understand how security agreement, i.e. backdoor NATO, and ceasefire work in the view of NATO, Europe especially, and maybe Trump too, how it works, right? Russia has always said no NATO, no ceasefire first. Now the Europeans are going to come back to Russia and say, okay, we agree to no NATO, but we got de facto NATO, right? The security agreement. And we agree no ceasefire first. We've met your demands, Russia. And we will sit down and negotiate, right? But you got to stop fighting. Well, that's what they want, to rebuild the Ukraine military, right? And stop Russia's advances. So what do they get? They get NATO by another name, security agreement, right? Mm-hmm. They get a ceasefire by Russia if Russia agrees to this, right? And okay, so they give up Donetsk province, but they're going to drag that out. They're not going to immediately pull out, They're going to use an excuse, and that won't really happen either, in my opinion, or it'll be so dragged out. So it's a maneuver. It's a Minsk 3 or Minsk 4, whatever, in my opinion, and the Europeans have been very clever, and Trump is very clever in this thing, saying, okay, we're saying no NATO, right? Okay, we're saying security agreement. You want a security agreement, Russia? Okay, we're not saying any more ceasefire first, Russia. It looks like the West is agreeing to Russia's positions. But in exchange for all this, we want you to stop fighting in place and stop beating up the Ukrainians and taking land. I think that's where they're going with all this. I don't trust them. It's been a long history of deception. I have a forthcoming book called The Twilight of American Imperialism, and I've done a lot of research on the U.S. imperialism. Mm-hmm. And imperialism is baked into the U.S. DNA from the very beginning, way back in the 1760s and 70s. Mm-hmm. The U.S. has been imperialist. Of course, it was all about, in the 18th and 19th century, driving the European imperial powers out of North America and taming the Native Americans, right? Mm-hmm. They got rid of the British, then they got rid of the Spanish, then the Mexicans, and then the French, right? They drove them out, conquered the continent by late 19th century. And what did they do when they had done that? Well, then they picked the Spanish-American War. And then the 20th century is all imperial military expansion. Very cleverly
doctrine and all of that.
Very cleverly done. Let the Europeans beat the hell out of each other and step in at the last moment and take their empire. That's what the U.S. did. And it's been imperial ever since, especially since the Soviet Union collapsed, right? So the U.S. is not going to back off of this. And I'm not sure whether Trump is consciously in knowledge of all this and part of this whole thing, or whether, he's just not clever enough, which may be the case. And the Europeans are trying to manipulate and maneuver him. And we will see what happens in that regard.
A couple of, I listened to Lil Marco Rubio, and I think he is an incredibly, incredibly ignorant man. But the reason that I listened to Lil Marco is because I think he's honest in his ignorance. And what I mean by that is he tells you what they're thinking for as wrong as they are. For example, he said back in March, he said, Donald Trump, he says it's been very clear from the beginning that Trump views this as a protracted stalemate. And frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. So he admits up front, this is a proxy conflict. Now, we don't hear that in the analysis in mainstream media.
No, they don't say anything.
But I don't think you can seriously or intelligently analyze this circumstance without understanding that reality. And the second point he made, well, he's made a number of points, but this past Sunday on Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, the commentator of Face the Nation, she says to Rubio, Putin did not give Trump the ceasefire he sought. And now Putin says the root causes of the conflict have to be resolved. Rubio says, these long historical complaints we've heard repeatedly, the bottom line is we're not going to focus on all of that stuff. 2 points, Jack. One, for Margaret Brennan to say, and now Putin says, she makes that as though this is an afterthought, when in fact, Putin has been consistent from day one. And now Rubio says, we're ignoring all of that. Well, so what you're saying is you're really not trying to settle this because you're ignoring the very things that Putin needs to resolve. As he said to Joe Biden when they met in Geneva, I'm giving you my security demands in writing, and I expect your response to me to be in writing. Joe Biden blew him off. Donald Trump's blowing him off. Marco Rubio is telling us we ain't listening to that. Big mistake.
Yeah, well, as I said, fundamentally, you got to understand they don't want an end to the war. As I said, European and Zelensky, of course, obviously don't want an end to war. What does the U.S. really want? What does Trump really want? Trump wants a PR event.
Trump wants the Nobel Prize.
Yes, that too. And the Europeans, by the way, I've been playing them, saying they will arrange it for him if he comes over to their side, right? Trump wants to look like, he's made the effort and he's the great mediator and he's made this big effort to end this war when he knows it's not going to end, right? But he gets the PR. He gets, he has this meeting in Alaska, and there'll be other meetings. And the U.S. and the West is trying to put themselves in a position to look like they've made a commitment. They have made a concession, right? Oh, no NATO. We know de facto NATO. Oh, no ceasefire first. Okay, the ball's in your court, Putin, right? Now, because before it was in, Ukraine's court. Putin made all these proposals and compromises, and Zelensky says, no. Well, Zelensky's still believes no, 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 no. But now they're being a little bit more clever, I think, on how they're trying to continue the war. And what do I mean continue the war? It means the first step is to get Russia to cease fire. That's how they continue the war.
They're being more clever, but they're only fooling themselves.
Well, we shall see. Yeah.
Sergei Lavrov ain't going for it. They're all, and here's and again I go back to the missiles. See, my opinion, Jack, and you've done more research on this than I have, but my opinion, if Putin stopped sending missiles into Witkoff goes to Moscow and he sits with Putin and he invites Putin to Alaska. Well, initially they said Putin asked for the trip. That's initially. Oh no, I know that.
That's the Western media. Yeah.
But right. Initially the story was Putin has asked Trump and Trump has agreed to see Putin in Alaska. And Putin was very clear in his remarks on Friday, you invited me and I accepted your invitation. And Donald Trump didn't push back at all. But while he's on his trip, he's still sending missiles into Ukraine. If he had stopped sending missiles and then went and met with Trump, I'd be more inclined to go along with your logic. But because Putin never stops sending missiles, he's saying, look, we'll talk all day and I'm going to send missiles all night.
Yeah, but if there is a security agreement and a, quote, ceasefire, then a condition of that, making those fake concessions by the West, the condition of that will have to be Putin to stop sending missiles.
See, I think the only thing that's going to stop this from the Russian side is surrender. I don't think.
I agree.
I don't think they can talk ceasefire and a rose by any other name. Would it smell so sweet? Surrender. The analogy I use is they got to fire up the USS Missouri, resurrect Emperor Hirohito, and sail that thing into the Black Sea, because surrender.
Yeah, but you got to understand that given this new position by NATO, the West, and the U.S., it makes it look like in the Western media that NATO, Europe, and the U.S. have made big concessions. That is the excuse to continue the weapons and the war. They got to make it look like, they are bending and Putin isn't bending anymore. That's how they justify another 100 billion and 55 billion. Lindsey Graham wants the 55 billion and 100 billion Europe. That's how they continue the funding.
Did you hear this? I heard a couple of analysts say this on Friday and Saturday. Putin accepted the invitation to Alaska to elevate his image on the world stage.
That's the way the media talks about it. Yeah.
I said to myself, do you have any idea who Vladimir Putin is? I mean, you obviously don't know who the man is. If you think he needs a meeting with Donald Trump to elevate his stature on the world stage.
Look, you can't believe anything in the Western media. The mainstream media, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, Fox, all of them are propaganda channels now. They are pushing the globalist propaganda channel. They are the media arm of the neocons in the U.S., right? So, you can't find out what's going on over there by listening to them. But that's the way they control public opinion to get it to continue to support the war.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. The problem is they're losing the argument. and they're losing the narrative. And
that's what the deal is about, to restore the narrative.
Go ahead.
Security agreement. Oh, no NATO, but security agreement. Oh, ceasefire, right? No ceasefire first, but ceasefire is in exchange for the security agreement, right? And we'll even throw in Donetsk, right? Which we won't really retreat from, right? If you agree to a ceasefire, right? I mean, it's very clever what they're trying to do, but it's all a Minsk III is really, in my view. I don't trust these NATO. I don't trust the U.S. The U.S. does not leave. NATO will not leave. It has to be driven out. Has to be driven out, in my opinion. I think this is all maneuvers going on, and I agree with you. I don't think Putin and the Russians are going to be fooled a third time, right? But now in the Western media, it's going to look like the West is conceding, but Putin's being a hard ass about the whole thing. He's continuing the fighting.
Oh, I think he's being an incredibly hard ass, because I interpret this as his saying, been through this with you guys too many times. You won't listen to me. And now I'm going to show you. And so he's demonstrating very clearly. So in your piece, and again, folks, you need to go to the LA Progressive, and the piece is entitled Putin-Trump Meeting Endgame or PR Event.
They can also reach the article on my blog, jackrasmus.com.
Okay.
Yeah, or Counterpunch or ZNet, where it's all over.
So and this is basically, I think, a summary of what we've gone through already. What's next post Alaska?
Is that a question to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
That's the last header in your piece. What's next?
Yeah, okay, right.
Go ahead,
well,
Jack.
I think more maneuvering. Trump is now apparently Putin and Zelensky and Trump are going to get together. They're going to try to double team Putin. But Trump takes the position, I'm a mediator. No, he's not the mediator. He's appearing as a mediator, in my opinion. Okay, I think the neocons are still in control in the U.S. and they're just looking for another. I think ideally what Trump would like to get out of this is a big PR plus for himself. One, secondly, the appearance that the U.S. is pulling out, and it will sell $100 billion to Europe, but they'll give to Ukraine, and military-industrial complex in the U.S. will be $100 billion richer. I think that's part of it as well. And I think the big question is if Trump pulls out, or nothing happens here, it collapses, which is more likely than not. Is the U.S. really going to pull out? Because it's one thing to provide money to Ukraine, which it has in the past under Biden and still under Trump. It's one thing to provide weapons, and the weapons flow approved under Biden has been occurring here still into Ukraine. But the question is, will the U.S. continue its other roles? The U.S., as you said, proxy war, true. Mm-hmm. How else is the U.S. participating directly in this war? Well, it's providing all the ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Correct. Right? Mm-hmm. It's also been training the Ukraine military. Right? Mm-hmm. It has generals on the ground in Ukraine, and colonels and so forth, advising the Ukraine military on tactics and so forth. It's directly involved. The Patriot anti-missile systems and other high-tech stuff. The Ukrainians can't fire that stuff, and it takes targeting from the satellites and so forth. Right. Americans are running those Patriot systems. So the U.S. is at war with Russia and has been from the very beginning. And the question is, if Trump says, I'm going out of here, okay, so instead of providing the weapons, he lets the Europeans buy it. Will he also pull out ISR training and strategic advice and so forth? I don't think so. I think the U.S. will continue because that's what the neocons want. You see, the neocons go to Trump and they say, "Oh, we got to do this to keep the pressure on him," right? And they know they're never going to agree to anything, even though there is more pressure. That's how they continue the war.
And so, and my question to Marco, to little Marco, and to what's his name from South Carolina,
Lindsey
Graham.
Yeah.
Do you realize you're losing? In fact, do you realize you've lost? Because in my opinion, they've lost. It's now just a matter of the longer you and part of what I read earlier talked about Zelensky's from the Washington Post. Zelensky believes that he can drag this out long enough for there to be an anti-Russia shift in the analysis. You don't have that much time left. And I don't think it's because I don't think Russia is not in Kiev because they can't. I think Putin and his generals strategically understand we don't want it. We don't want to capture that flag because of the responsibilities that would and the responses and responsibilities that would come from because that would validate the European position in terms of the narrative. That would validate the European position that Putin all along has wanted to take over Europe, even though we know that's not true. I think if he goes into Kiev, they say, "See, we told you." And his whole thing has been, "I'll stop fighting as soon as you guys cry uncle."
Well, see, the Europeans kind of like that to happen because it justifies we got to spend $1 trillion to mobilize and militarize. I mean, look, the new Chancellor Merz, which is a real neocon warmonger, okay?
Mm-hmm.
This new guy, Merz. What did he say? This doesn't appear in U.S. media, by the way. What did he say? He says, we're going to spend $1 trillion to rearm Germany.
Right.
And we need 2 years before we have a NATO-Russia war. They want to buy 2 years' time. Mm-hmm. They think, Europe thinks that they need 2 years in order to prepare for a more direct conflict with Russia because they have no military themselves. And whether the U.S. really participates in that is another question. I don't think the U.S. will go to war over Europe, nuclear war with Russia over Europe, but and they kind of suspect that. So they need 2 years. And in the meantime, this military buildup here props up their economy at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that's where you got to understand it. They're trying to buy time here, like they did with Minsk II. They bought time, right? This is all about buying time and mobilizing not just Ukraine, but Europe itself for a bigger conflict with Russia.
I don't think Putin, I think he learned that lesson. He's not giving them time. My final question to you, and thank you as always, Jack, for your time. Do you think we get to the point where Donald Trump loses interest in this whole thing? Because one of the things that we're told about him is that he has the attention span of a mosquito. And so do we get to the point where he just says, let's go launch a war against China?
No, I don't think so, because the U.S. can't win a proxy war against Russia. How the hell is it going to?
Well,
with 15,000-mile logistical chain, and with the weaponry that.
What I meant was, no, I didn't really mean we're going to go, even though they're trying their best to bait China into a conflict. I was really joking with that one. Okay. But do you think that it gets to a point where Donald Trump loses interest in this conflict?
It could, because as you say, whoever talks to him last tends to bend his ear, and I think the neocons have convinced him that this new strategy that I talked about might be able to end the war and for him to get a big PR and a Nobel Prize, which he really wants to do, right? Mm-hmm. I think, they've convinced him. But see, it's the neocons. This isn't Trump. This is the neocons who are still running the show in the U.S. on foreign policy, right? And they've been very clever. They're aligned with the Europeans and are aligned with Ukraine. They've been very clever in manipulating him. You know, for a while, when he first came in office, he was going to, I'm going to do this in 24 hours. And there were some initiatives. Then he flipped in April and he went right over to the Biden neocon position, right? Now he's
wait. That's key, Jack. That's key. The Biden neocon position. People need to understand this is not Republican or Democrat. This is not, has nothing to do with party affiliation. This is neocon.
This is the deep state running foreign policy, and it has for decades. And it doesn't matter who's the president. You know, I mean, Americans have this false view that the president really runs foreign policy in the country. No, the president is just one node in determining foreign policy. You've got the deep state, you got the U.S. military, you got the military-industrial complex, you got the key people in the Senate and House committees, right? You got the mainstream media. This is the state. The state is not elected. The state is permanent. It's always there. In fact, the president can't fire a lot of these people anymore, right? The president has limited power and authority to really do this, unless he really wants to reassert executive power. But Trump, we've seen, does not really go to that extent. He will always
foreign policy.
Back down, and he's back down in April. He's reasserting it because this new formula looks like he might be able to do something with it and look good, right? So he's, but the formula is the neocon formula. You know, it's not Trump, and it won't succeed. But you know, the U.S. neocons and the Europeans will then put the ball in Putin's court and make it look in the Western media that, they've made these concessions now, Putin, you know, you're being hardline. Okay, if you're being hardline, well, then we're going to spend more money on weapons. That's it.
Dr. Jack Rasmus, as always, man, thank you so much for your time today. Greatly appreciate that analysis. And as always, we look forward to having you back.
Always glad to join you.
Thanks.
Give me a call.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. Dr. Radhika Desai is going to be with us tomorrow. And just like Jack Rasmus, just phenomenal mind, phenomenal analysis, phenomenal person. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of policy, politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Why? Because we're rhetoric free. See you all tomorrow. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.